I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Today, I'm releasing 4 brand new episodes of Parallax Views back to back as part of a special fundraising push to keep the show going strong. Each episode represents the kind of deep dive, thought-provoking content you've come to expect from the program. This mega drop isn't just a content dump, it's a statement. Independent media matters, and your support makes it possible. If Parallax Views has challenged your thinking, exposed you to new ideas, or simply kept you company on your commute, now's the time to help sustain it. Listen, share, and if you can, support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. If you want, you can also make a one-time donation by contacting me at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com. I can give you a link to my PayPal page if you contact me that way. Let's show what listener-supported media can do. With that out of the way, on this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from returning guest Jeet Heer, the nation's national affairs correspondent. And we'll be discussing Zohran Mamdani's massive victory against Andrew Cuomo in the New York City mayoral primaries. Even if you're not a New Yorker, Jeet argues that this is significant, as it shows the weakness of establishment Democrats. It's open season now, folks, and the left has a chance to make an impact. We're also going to be discussing Silicon Valley big tech oligarchs, and in particular, Peter Thiel. Thiel was recently interviewed by Ross Douthat, and the conversation got really interesting between those two when Douthat started asking about Thiel's views on the Antichrist and whether Thiel believed in the continuation of the human species. You may be saying, what? Well, Peter Thiel is one of these figures that is sort of associated with big tech figures that believe in things like post-human or transhuman futures. Futures in which innovation is not bound by humanity. His big concern is stagnation. But what does that mean? What is Thiel getting at with all of this? What to make of his interest in ancient prophecies, the Antichrist, and his reluctance to answer Douthat's question about the continuation of the human species? Maybe I shouldn't say reluctance, but rather, well, what Douthat himself called hesitation. Jeet and I will discuss the sort of anti-human philosophy underpinning a lot of big tech thinkers these days. So, with all that in mind, let's get right to it with Jeet Heer. Welcome back to Parallax Views, a guest that I always enjoy having on the show. He's become sort of a quasi-regular here. He's also on our friends at the Majority Reports show with Sam Cedar often, and I'm so happy to have him back on. Jeet Heer is the national affairs correspondent at The Nation, and we have a lot to talk about because it has been a wild month. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah. No, it has been pretty busy. Yeah.
So, I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you about is this I would say massive victory that Zohran Mamdani had
Yeah.
over Andrew Cuomo. I mean, this is the defeat of a political dynasty that had a lot of money behind it in the mayoral race. And even though he's not in the mayor yet, I mean, this is already a big victory in and of itself for Zohran.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. And it's hard to overstate the extent of the victory. I mean, first of all, like, New York has ranked choice voting, so we don't actually like know the final result. But I mean, I think there's good reason to think that he will actually expand his lead, partially because he did very intelligently cultivated his rivals and got them to rank him as well. Whereas Andrew Cuomo seemed to think that this was a typical first past the base election, and he didn't rank anyone else. Like Andrew Cuomo just voted for himself, which actually cost him votes. Because now so right now it is a 7 point lead. I think once all the votes are, the ranking process is finished, I think it'll actually be like a 10 point lead. And to sort of like maybe emphasize this, Eric Adams, the current mayor of New York, like won by a small fraction in the final vote. And at that time, people like Nate Silver and people like Nancy Pelosi were saying that Eric Adams is going to be a national figure and that Democrats should follow the lead of Eric Adams and run his sort of campaign. And Eric Adams was brought over to the address congressional Democrats to how he won this stunning victory of 1%. So where Zoran is, I think, going to have like a 10% victory. And as you said, like, the Cuomo family, I mean, Andrew Cuomo had been governor. So he is already like a statewide leader. But the Cuomo family itself had been very prominent in New York politics, going back to at least the 1960s. The father had been a governor as well. And the father, Mario Cuomo, had actually run for mayor. And so this is, and they had, as you said, like a lot of money. And I think it's worth emphasizing that because of a super PAC, they had like more than $35 million like in the bank. As against Zoran basically had a very small super PAC, and then also the $8 million that you're allowed as a candidate. So it was like basically a 4-to-1 advantage in terms of money, 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 within that range. And also endorsements. I mean, Andrew Cuomo had the endorsement of Bill Clinton, former president, James Clyburn, the sort of kingmaker who basically was I think, maybe the major figure that got Joe Biden the Democratic nomination, and also like a ton of institutional support from the labor unions, who, based on reporting, basically said they were scared of Andrew Cuomo. That it's not so much they liked him, but they thought like if this guy becomes mayor, he's gonna like mess with us, and if we don't endorse him. But also like a lot of other prominent figures in the party. So it was like, and I would add a media advantage in the sense that the New York Times didn't endorse anyone, but they said we don't endorse Zoran, and we would not recommend it to voters not to rank him. And they had like many hostile press coverage in both the New York Times and the Atlantic, of the centrist press, not to mention the New York Post.
Which is kind of crazy because I mean Cuomo himself has a lot of well,
Well, yeah, no, but
scandals. Yeah.
this is the amazing thing, because a lot of Democratic Party officials that had previously called Andrew Cuomo to resign when he was governor, like now endorsed him. And the New York Times had an editorial calling on him to resign when he was governor. But now, against, I guess, what they saw as the threat of Zoran, they basically gave him a kind of backhanded endorsement. I mean, I think if you read their final assessment, it is kind of not so much pro Como but anti Como, and basically saying, this might be the best bet. So I kind of think it, like considering all the advantages that uh, Como had going in, it is actually quite a stunning thing. And I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of the Democratic Party establishment and the centrist establishment doesn't have authority anymore. That I think the people who listened to them in 2020 and listened to James Clyburn went with Joe Biden, listened to, the kind of fear mongering against Bernie Sanders that happened in 2020. It doesn't work anymore because we've had the Biden presidency. People saw that, like, if you listen to the establishment, you will get a very unsatisfying government and also like all the kind of deceptions of Biden's health. So I actually think that the larger significance here is that the what one could call the Democratic Party establishment, which includes not just the party, but like all the kind of institutional forces, including things like the New York Times and the Atlantic, they don't have the authority they once did. And I think that a candidate who is able to mobilize people on economic populism, the way Zoran did, can override those, and I think override that establishment. So I think that that has great significance going forward into the future.
Yeah, I want to stick on that point because I think I'm going to have some listeners that are going to be wondering, well, why is everyone so interested in this mayoral race in New York? But I think this story of the rise of Zohran Mamdani has a greater significance even beyond New York.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I actually kind of think, as I mentioned, like Eric Adams, his victory, which was a very narrow victory, was used to kind of sell a kind of centrist backlash politics, saying that now Democrats have to be tough on crime. But before that, I mean, I think it's worth noting that New York is often a bellwether, and one can see it in the sort of, going back to Rudy Giuliani and his kind of law and order politics, but even like Bill de Blasio. I think people forget this, but Bill de Blasio's victory, which was unexpected, was a kind of harbinger of a growing progressive strength within the Democratic Party. And it was really he was the kind of the John the Baptist to Bernie Sanders, and really showed that there's a much more of an audience for this sort of thing. One could say maybe de Blasio was a disappointing mayor, but he actually won re-election. He always had his base, and he actually made a kind of significant policy innovation in terms of expanding childcare. So I actually think that this is actually a very significant race, and it is the kind of first kind of indication that the Democratic Party establishment is much weaker than people think, and then now I think it's going to actually be like it's going to be it's already shaping up to be a very nasty race to actually win the mayorship because I think that all the forces, all the sort of billionaires that supported Andrew Cuomo, they're not going to go away, and we already see this. There's going to be a lot of sort of Islamophobia and fear mongering. But again, Andrew Cuomo already tried that. I mean, Andrew Cuomo basically ran on like Israel, saying that like he's going to stand with Israel and Zoran isn't, and with the conventional understanding that in New York that is good politics. Well, in New York, that turned out not to be good politics. It turned out not to be good politics even in with many Jewish voters because Zoran seems to have come in like second with Jewish voters, but I think in a lot of areas like Park Slope came in first. And I think there's a kind of generational divide. I mean, basically, Andrew Cuomo basically just won with older voters, the kind of voters that would listen to Bill Clinton and James Clyburn. But the electorate itself that showed up was exceptionally young.
You
I mean,
cut
I think
out
there's been
there
some
for a
revision on it
second. You
because
said the voters that turned out were
oh,
exceptionally young.
exceptionally young, exceptionally young. Like we all know that like in normal elections, old people vote in higher percentage than young people. But I actually think that it seems like now the biggest block of voters demographically were people in their early 30s. But that also even people who are 18 to 22 showed up in massive numbers. And they basically were able to override the votes of people who were like 65 and over, who were the Andrew Cuomo voters. I think Andrew Cuomo had the votes of older Democrats who are the type of people that respect Bill Clinton and respect James Clyburn. But like if you're a Democrat in your 20s and 30s, like you hear the name Bill Clinton, and honestly, the first thing you think of is Jeffrey Epstein. Like that is his kind of because you have no memory of the Clinton presidency, and there's all these photos circulating, and you hear the name James Clyburn, and the first thing that you think of is, oh, this is a guy that supported Joe Biden, who turned out to be too old and who basically wrecked the Democratic Party and led to Trump winning again. So among younger voters, the big names of the party, the names Clinton and Clyburn no longer carry power, I think. Uh,
Something that's really interesting to me is that there's so much focus on Zohran and Israel in the mainstream media,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the issue of will he address anti-Semitism. I think he's dealt with that very well. But
Mm.
I almost feel like all this talk about Israel, first off, it's weird. I mean, he's
Yeah,
running.
it's very exceptionally weird. Yeah, yeah. Why
Yeah,
should
I mean, he's
the
running
mayor
for
of New
mayor of
York
New York City, not Tel Aviv.
yeah, 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 yeah,
But
yeah.
the thing is, I almost feel like the Israel stuff is a way to distract from the fact that he's not going to be friendly to billionaires. The
Oh
billionaire
yeah, yeah, no,
class is
absolutely,
afraid of him
absolutely,
in New
yeah, yeah,
York.
yeah. No, I actually that came through very amusingly in one of the interviews he did, I think on MSNBC, where he's asked, do billionaires have a right to exist? A kind of twist on the normal question: does Israel have a right to exist? Well, I think it is. Yeah, I think you're right in terms of distraction, and I think especially based on this kind of like old politics, there was a view that like New York does have the second highest number of Jews anywhere in the world after Tel Aviv. And there was a kind of view that Jewish voters would vote on this, which actually I think turned out not to be the case. There were a lot, I mean, of younger Jewish voters who are left wing who liked him on the economic policy. But also, I would actually even add, even a little bit further, I actually think, like, if you actually look at the polling, Israel is actually very unpopular right now, even with the majority of Americans, but especially unpopular with Democrats, Democratic Party voters, because they saw, I mean, they've seen the last 10 years, 15 years, where Netanyahu is basically like a Republican and basically, always wants Republicans to win. And they also have seen, what we've all seen, which is the horrific images of the slaughter of civilians that has been going on for, like almost 2 years now. And if you look among Democratic Party voters, the support for Israel is now, I think the last poll I saw from Gallup was like 21%. It's very low. And I actually think that to the extent that Cuomo made this issue about Israel, he hurt himself. Like, because on two levels. One is, oh, like, why are you concerned about this other country that's not even the responsibility of the mayor of New York. But also, what you just said, but also on the fact of like, why are you so concerned about this like other country that like we're actually not very fond of, and we actually think that like maybe we shouldn't be sending like tens of billions of dollars to while we have our own economic problems. So I honestly think I think one of the things is that the Zoran victory will be a harbinger of change on the politics of Israel. Because if you can't win on Israel in New York, like where are you going to be able to win on this? Do you think like voters in like Wisconsin or yeah, Nebraska are going to be like, we really want our representatives to go down to Tel Aviv every few months and to, kiss the ring of Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't think that's where voters are, like, honestly.
Do you think this was sort of a vote that was made in part because he was sort of calling out the billionaires and saying that there are real class issues in America?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I mean, like Zoran ran an absolutely like class first campaign, and I mean that is why he won. I mean, like New York. Adam Tooze, the economic historian at Columbia, did a very good post on this. But I mean, New York is an incredibly unequal city, precisely because it is a city of both like Wall Street and like it's a big urban center where like the cost of living is out of control, where rent is out of control, and so like very basic things like, let's streamline the licensing process so that you can get like $8 halal chicken instead of $10 halal chicken. I mean, that sort of stuff matters a lot. And the fact that you're saying like, let's tax the billionaires so we can get free transit and let's have rent control. I mean that is basically why he won. It's the kind of economics of it. Um, uh,
It's really interesting, not to interrupt you, but I already see some of my sort of centrist Democrat friends trying to do damage control, saying, well, this may work in talking about class may work in New York City, but this isn't how it works in a place like Texas, or the Democrats can't win on Zohran's message elsewhere. And I'm not so sure, but it seems like
Yeah,
they're
no, no,
afraid
no.
that this is going to
I
blow
mean, well,
up.
the thing is, they did not do that when Eric Adams won. When Eric Adams won a very narrow victory in just a few years ago, he was brought over to Washington, D.C. to address the Democrats in Congress, and he was cited as a potential national leader. People like Nate Silver were saying like, well, maybe they should run Eric Adams for president. And so you're basically saying like if it's someone who shares your politics and they become they win the Democratic primary in New York, that is a politics you can run everywhere. But if they don't share your politics, then that's just a New York thing. I mean, that just actually does not make a lot of sense, especially since Zoran won much more handily against much greater like opposition than Eric Adams did. I mean, like it doesn't pass the smell test.
Well, there's always an excuse that gets made whenever economic populism is shown to actually have resonance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. No, absolutely. And I mean, I mean, the basic fact is that the economic populist, we know that it works elsewhere because, like Osborne lost in Nebraska, but he ran as an independent candidate and came very close, running on a sort of economic populist message in Nebraska, and we also see this with a lot of Democrats who are in very purple states, very in very close districts. And what they're doing right now is asking Bernie Sanders to come speak with us them. And Bernie is doing rallies in all these places that are very purple places. And these are Democratic Congress people, and they're doing this because they know that Bernie is more popular than the Democratic Party. Bernie is actually, by all the polling, and this goes back many years, is the most popular Democrat among independent voters and is the most popular Democrat among voters in general. And is more popular, has been more popular than the party itself. So, I mean, I think they all know that economic populism can sell. They just don't want this to be the message because this would offend their donors. And they're more concerned about, they would rather keep the donor money and lose elections than not have the donor money and win elections.
I also wanted to ask you, what do you think about the votes he got? It seems like, I was telling a few Democrats that are wary of Zoran because they come from that sort of centrist background. I hear centrists always saying we need to get the middle vote. It seems like he got the middle vote, and not only that, he
Oh,
got like the middle income vote.
yeah, yeah, no, no, no. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, basically, it was a kind of straight down the middle that actually, Como did the best among the very richest, and the very poorest, and I think that's partially a matter of the age, factor that he got like old people, and old people tend to be either, like the boomers that have the money, and then the boomers that are dependent on Social Security and therefore very tied to the Democratic Party. But among the middle voters, that's where Zoran got. He also got, like basically all the demographics that abandoned the Democratic Party in 2024, and including abandoning it in New York, because in New York there had been a big swing to the right in 2024. And there was a swing to the right among young male voters, but not just young male voters, among Latino voters, among Asian American voters, um, and among young Black voters. Uh, all those categories are the ones that Zoran won. So basically, if the Democratic Party actually wanted to rebuild their coalition and to win back the voters that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris lost, they would like try to run a figure like Zoran. And the fact that it's not seen in those terms, I mean, maybe says more about the political party than anything else. I think, there's a line in Milton's Paradise Lost, where Satan says, "It's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven." And I often think that this sort of satanic line is how the Democratic Party establishment thinks, that they would rather rule as a losing party than to be victorious, but have to serve economic populism.
In terms of, and I do want to move on to your recent article about Peter Thiel, but before we do that, in terms of the attacks we're seeing on Zohran, as you said, this election was, or this primary was basically a referendum on whether anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism was right or not. And, the people that said, oh, we can conflate the two, they lost, as Spencer Ackerman pointed out
Yeah.
recently. But now we're just seeing these like really heinous and grotesque attacks on Mamdani, about how he eats his food, just like really racist, like, oh, he's a third worlder. I mean, I just, it's so bizarre how much uh, hatred there is for this one man. And not only that, it's weird to me that there's so much focus on him from establishment Democrats on the other end of this because the racism comes from the really right wing types. But the Democrats are so focused on
But not
this.
just the really right-wing types. I mean, I would actually say that Kristen Gillibrand, the Democratic senator from New York, I mean, like basically her whole rant about how, his rhetoric is, sort of like jihadi terrorism, which I
Well, it's
believe.
insane because they're saying you have to denounce a statement that you never made. He's never used this globalize the intifada term anyways. So I don't.
Yeah, no, 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 but I mean, a lot of it is about. I think a lot of this goes back to the fact that they know they're losing their status and their power. They know that these kind of shibboleths no longer work, and that they know that this kind of unquestioning support of Israel is no longer popular. Actually, I would say argue like among voters in both parties that one is seeing for the first time among both Republicans and Democrats, people basically like questioning why is the United States committing so much resources and so much risk and potentially so much of its own uh, soldiers, like on behalf of wars for Israel. Like one hears this among the sort of Tucker Carlson people on the right, and also increasingly on the left from people like Zoran. So I think that this is like a kind of establishment that like is kind of like in a panic mode and doesn't know what to do and is just gonna like keep hitting the panic button harder and harder, even though the primaries showed that it does not work. And then now it does not work. I actually think it's counterproductive. Like I actually think that a lot of people, this was a change election, and I think we're gonna get change elections for a long time in the future because people are very unhappy. And the more you portray a candidate as this is an anti-establishment, anti-system person who doesn't follow the familiar script of, Israel has a right to defend itself. We must stand with Israel. Israel is America's best friend. The more you emphasize that, the more you like give credibility. I mean, I think Zoran won a lot of credibility because he would not play their game. He would not denounce slogans that they don't like. And honestly, like after 2 years of the killing fields of Gaza, after we see reports in Haaretz of IDF soldiers like opening fire on civilians who are like gathered to collect food, like why would anybody? These people have no moral credibility. They have no like status. Like there's no one who's an adult and a grown up who has looked at the situation and thinks like I have to be subservient to the American Israeli foreign policy line on the Middle East. Like I mean, they're kind of they're empty and they know that they're empty. I think is, but that doesn't mean that they're going to give up power. They're absolutely committed to holding on to power as long as they can. But I mean, I think the Zoran thing is very hopeful and and I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, I think one kind of pathway for a left candidate for president in 2028 would be to say, like, in my presidency, Jake Sullivan will not have a job. Brett McGurk will not have a job because the Democrats they're creating this Project 2026, and they're trying to rehabilitate all these characters and all these people who were like, oversaw this disaster. So
And
I
it's
actually
real quick.
think,
It's crazy because the one thing Democrats had to offer all these years was, well, we're the only ones that can stop Trump and the far
yeah,
right, and they failed. So it's
yeah.
open season now.
It is it's absolutely open season, and yeah, and I mean it's interesting to see who comes out to the Bernie Sanders rallies. A lot of them are these older Democrats who had supported Biden or whatever, had listened to James Clyburn, and now they realize that they've been abandoned by their own party. The establishment Democrats are surrendering, are not fighting back. But also, I mean, I honestly on the Israel issue, I think the establishment has hurt itself and has lost credibility and yeah, we're gonna see like how it goes. But I mean, like in some ways, this is somebody compared it to sort of like anti-communism during the Cold War. Like it's a sort of bipartisan consensus ideology that holds everything together. But I gotta say, like anti-communism, at least before the Vietnam War, at least in the 50s, had like far greater consensus support among people of like all political stripes than like Zionism has now. Uh, so like I think if that this is what they think is going to be the ideology that holds their project together, well, they're just going to be in for a surprise.
The other part of that question that I was going to ask you was, it's interesting to me that a lot of establishment Democrats, for lack of a better term, are really focused on, oh, this is horrible. Zohran, his rise is going to be bad for the Democrats. Meanwhile, we have Trump and the big, beautiful bill, and a lot of Americans aren't even being informed about this. Democrats
Yeah.
don't seem to care at all. Do
Well,
you
yeah.
notice that? Am I crazy to think, like, wait, are they using Zohran to ignore the bill? Like,
Yeah. Well, they are because I mean the whole thing. Going back to like, I mean, basically James Carville laid out this strategy in the New York Times where he said we have to have a play dead strategy. We have to, just like do nothing and wait for Trump to collapse. And if one looks at the behavior of Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, they absolutely have a play dead strategy, and that they are much more comfortable in fighting Zoran than they are in fighting Trump. But which again I sort of see as discrediting. Like I think that this, like if that is your policy then I think ordinary Democrats who want to fight Trump, are gonna ignore you. Like I think that there's been an enormous kind of like loss of status of these leaders. But we'll see how it plays out. I mean, I think the next step will be to see if you can primary a lot of Democrats, in a sort of Tea Party fashion in 2026, and put the fear of God into them, and then you can have a change of leadership in the party.
moving on to the Peter Thiel piece that you wrote for The Nation. I think that just came out today or yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the billionaires are abandoning humanity. I find this topic really interesting. I've followed other writers on this, like Douglas Rushkoff. It's very interesting seeing Peter Thiel in an interview with Ross Douthat, basically, not be able to answer the question, are you for humanity enduring? What is going on with these figures like Thiel? Are they just on some kind of drug trip or what?
Well, actually, this goes back to an earlier piece I wrote, which is basically, I mean, a lot of the American ruling class, their actions make sense if you realize that they are, in fact, on drugs. We know this from good reporting in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, that like Elon Musk, for example, is taking like an enormous amount, an abusive amount of ketamine, combined with apparently, like acid, mushrooms. Yeah, which is all like kind of fine recreationally, but like to the extent that he's using it as much as he is, and this is common in Silicon Valley of sort of microdosing acid, using ketamine as a performance enhancing thing. Um, this actually, like these drugs do have an effect of streamlining reality. And actually, I think it's shown that like the more you use ketamine, the more you're likely to believe that reality is a simulation. Like this is one of the effects. And no, no, so that's the sort of pharmaceutical explanation. But I mean, there's also a materialist explanation, which is like if you're a billionaire, and we've created a lot of billionaires through social policy. You're kind of in the position of being like a god. Like you're like a pharaoh in antiquity, right? You're like beyond normal humanity. And what one sees is in this class of people, um like obviously the rich people have always had bad reactionary politics, wanted to push back against things like labor unions or whatever. But what is I think maybe new or innovative, or at least new since maybe the time of antiquity. I mean, I do think the pharaohs thought of themselves as divine beings, and this is why you had like pharaohs' brothers marrying sisters, right? Because they're not bound by the normal laws of humanity. They're classed by themselves. If you're like a god, you can't marry a mortal. You have to just marry another god, which happens to be your sister. Uh, so I think among the Silicon Valley elite, one has seen both a kind of investment in the sort of Donald Trump reactionary politics, but also a kind of plan B. Like, what will happen if we can't achieve our political goals? And the plan B is a kind of technological divorce from humanity. And there's a bunch of different variations of this. There is a sort of Robert Heinlein fantasy of space colonization. We'll colonize the moon and Mars and create libertarian utopias where we don't have regulation. Another variation is what's called seasteading, which is that you create like ships, large ships that are outside of normal jurisdiction and will be these libertarian utopias. Another variation is immortality. Peter Thiel has said he does not accept the ideology of death, by which he means the biological fact that like all living creatures die. He does not accept that, and he thinks that through technological means, humanity will conquer death. And been in Silicon Valley. There's been a bunch of variations of this. About 20 years ago, psionics was very popular. Like freezing the body, or in Futurama style, just freezing the head. And, but also, like there's one other billionaire who basically gets blood transfusions every month of like blood from young people. And I think Thiel is interested in this idea that if you can harvest the blood of young people, he can like be healthy and live longer. So the conquest of death, and also another variation is downloading our brains onto computers, and therefore becoming immortal technological beings. Another variation is AI, which is to create not just the technology of AI, but the fantasy of AI, of the singularity, of creating an AI that will become a god, will like supersede humanity. I think that the terminology people use is successor species. We will create a successor species of AI and robots that will replace humanity. And I think undergirding all of this is the fact that, they just don't like see themselves as being part of normal humanity, and they want to be gods. They want to be immortal, all-powerful beings that are not regulated by social norms, but by the laws of society. And yeah, I have to say, like whatever, humanity has its flaws, original sin or whatever, but I actually want the human species to continue. This is my big argument, political argument with them. It's not even like, like class, how much distribution of wealth. I want the human species to continue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to talk a little bit more about that because, I thought it was interesting how Ross Douthat, who's very much on the right, was sort of put off by Till in that interview. He's like, "Why are you hesitating so much to say, to being pro-humanity?" And it's interesting to me because I think you've seen other sort of right-wing intellectual figures like Joel Kotkin and also Michael Lind, who I've corresponded a bit with in emails about his issue with what he calls the eugenicons, or eugenics loving
Yeah, yeah. Oh
conservatives.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, eugenics is another variation of this, of like basically what Elon Musk is doing, of like just having enormous numbers of children, far more than we apparently know about, with a lot of women to create your own what Musk calls his legion. He wants to create like his own separate nation of little Musks.
Well, what I was going to ask was, do you think there's a significance to the fact that even a lot of sort of right-wing commentariat are put
Yeah.
off by this?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's two aspects of this. One is a simple material aspect that if anyone thinks about this, and the other variation of this is underground bunkers, the Doctor Strangelove fantasy, which a lot of these guys invest in like huge bunkers in New Zealand and
Right,
think
this is
that
what
like
Rushkoff talks about. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So again, like obviously, if one thinks about this, like just from a self-interested point of view, like you realize that, well, wait a minute, I'm not a billionaire. Like I'm not going to be one of the guys that's in the underground bunker with like the 100 nubile women, as in Doctor Strangelove, to repopulate the species. I'll be one of the guys that's out there dying in the apocalyptic Mad Max world. So I think a lot of people like do that and then realize like, wait a minute, like this is actually not good for me. Because I'm actually not going to be, even if you're like a millionaire or you're a successful columnist, you're not going to have the kind of money that's needed for this. It is a fantasy for not just the 1%, but the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. It is a fantasy for the few thousand billionaires in the world. The second aspect of this, I mean, that's the material aspect. The second aspect, what we call the superstructure on top of that base, is religion, which I mean, do that is a very serious Catholic. And like in Catholicism, and Thiel tries to appropriate this. He used the language of the Antichrist, saying Greta Thunberg is the Antichrist, and saying that like in Christianity we also want to try to transcend it. But like I'm sorry, and I'm not a Christian, but I have read the Bible and I know a lot of other religions, and the transcendence of religion, the transcendence of Christianity, of Islam, of Sikhism, of Buddhism, is not a transcendence of technology, and it's not a transcendence of like a financial elite that will like be able to become gods and enter the world. It's a moral transcendence that you overcome the what's evil or wrong or corrupt or impure in your heart to achieve a higher level of humanity, and if you're religious, to achieve a kind of like oneness with God or providence or whatever. It's a totally different thing. So I think if you do take religion seriously, or if you take any sort of ethics seriously, like there's no ethical code in the history of humanity that says like like a small elite of humanity has the right to live like gods while the rest of the species dies. Like so like if you take any sort of like religion or humanistic ethics seriously, then of course these guys are an abomination. And credit to Ross do that, because I mean obviously it's in his political interest. I mean, Thiel is a sponsor of JD Vance and other people that do that likes, but I think it is significant that like anyone who takes religion or what I would call even humanistic ethics seriously, has to see these guys as not just wrong, but like profoundly evil. And this, I mean, do that like basically kind of hinted at this, like saying to Peter Thiel, well, you're saying Greta Thunberg is the Antichrist, but like, aren't you much closer to being, the traditional image of the Antichrist
Well, yeah, because
than
especially with what he said about, he's like, well, you're building like a complete surveillance system with Palantir. Couldn't this be used by an antichrist?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And then to put it in secular terms, I mean, I know not all listeners will be religious. Um, uh, to put it in secular terms, one can see like if one sees Christ as the symbol of humanity, as a symbol of a kind of humanistic, love of humanity, then Thiel is the Antichrist. I mean, like in a very literal, non-religious sense. Like what he's promoting is a profoundly anti-human ideology. That's antithetical to anything that has ever been considered humanism, or ethical, or living within the bounds of the law, of social law. Like it's a rejection not just of Christianity, but like, like basic, moral philosophy going back to Aristotle, or, one could argue in other traditions going back to Confucius. It really is like an astonishing abomination.
It's interesting because I think it's easy to get caught up in the rambling he did during that interview. I mean, he's talking about like, well, Charles Manson realized he could be an anti-hero in a Dostoevsky novel in real life, and it's like, what is he talking about? But there is something there where I guess his big obsession is with stagnation and
Oh yeah.
the
Well,
humanists have led to stagnation.
I should mention that because I mean he is actually, this is one area where Thiel is not totally wrong. I mean, it is a basic fact that in the Western world, not this so we can exclude China from this because it's very different. But in the Western world, we have had basically a stagnation since the early 70s. I mean, there's been some growth because of like the computers and internet, but actually not a lot of that. I mean, those, as Thiel himself admits, maybe added like 1 point to the economy, at best, like, for 10, 15 years. But, like basically the great period of like, the golden age of capitalism was 1945 to 1973. And since then, we've had this enormous period of stagnation all across the board. A stagnation, not just of economic growth, but of technological development, and social, a stagnation of like, upward mobility or the ability of people to lead lives, even like a stagnation now in America, decline of health in the working class, right? A decline of like living standards. So Thiel is absolutely right about that. Now, what he's wrong, and he offers this sort of theory of what went wrong. And he actually literally says it's the fault of the hippies that you had
I guess
that
that's where the Charles Manson thing comes in at or
Charles
something.
Manson and the hippies, that you had, this period of great economic growth, and you had like the Apollo mission, and then you had the hippie flower power, and then the hippies, he said the hippies won. And that now the world has given up on the future and technology. Well, I'm sorry, but like, like Charles Manson, or like Robert Crumb, they were not the president in like 1970. Like Nixon was the president. And we've had 50 years of policy to deal with the stagnation, going back to Thatcher and Reagan, where the idea of you deal with stagnation by tax cuts for the rich and by deregulation to open up the economy. And guess what? And that's also Donald Trump's policy. And guess what? It has not worked. It has absolutely not solved the problem of economic stagnation. And one could look to other alternatives. I mean, this is why going back to economic populism. I mean, one of the arguments for economic populism is that the cause of the stagnation is the lower purchasing power of the working class. That if you had like, a working class that had a greater share of the economy, they could be buying more, and there'd be more incentives for technological innovation. Now, one can argue that whether that's true or not, but it is like actually something that we have not tried. And it is an actual like alternative. Whereas what is Thiel is offering is, on the one hand, a complete fairy tale. I mean, it's absurd. It's literally absurd to say stagnation is because of the hippies, of people who have not lived for like 50 years and never had political power. And furthermore, that the solutions he's offering for stagnation have already been tried repeatedly, tried by both political parties, and they have failed. And what we have seen, and this is what like people like Eric Hobsbawm talk about, what we've seen is a period where capitalization has become financialized, where the only innovation is in Wall Street, and where we've had repeatedly a series of bubbles that have burst, that have had to be shored up by government funding and bailouts. And that policy has not worked. So I take the issue of stagnation and abundance very seriously, but like, like the only regime that is, and this is not a politically good regime, but like, like the Chinese are actually have some sort of thinking about stagnation, about investing in new technologies. But what Thiel is doing is not that. And like it's like it's just a purely self-interested politics.
I was going to add to that. I think all this talk he does of the Antichrist, he's almost talking about the Antichrist as like a metaphor for, there's too much safetyism and too much
Yeah.
promise of peace. And that's where everything went downhill as this promise of peace and
Yeah.
safetyism. And basically he's saying, everything that came after World War II ruined America and ruined the world. And basically he's just against humanism.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I mean, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, he does. He sort of. He basically does say like the Antichrist is not Doctor Strangelove, it's Greta Thunberg. Which again, like Ross do that to his credit. Says like Greta Thunberg is just like she's in a boat in the Mediterranean. She is not like the powerful figure. But beyond that, I mean, like it is. I mean, I mean, it is a kind of astonishing. Um, I mean, his religious turn or his use of religion does seem like even by the standards of religion, astonishingly fraudulent and self-interested.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you before we close out here is when you take out all the religious language and all of this interest he has in ancient prophecies and the Antichrist, and I guess he gave a speech about this all at a thing called Hereticon. But when you strip that away, I think what we're dealing with is a much more secular and
Yeah, no, I
really
mean,
anti-humanist philosophy. What do
yeah,
you
no,
see
no,
as the
I mean, it's the sort of standard philosophy of like the rich should get to rule and dominate and do whatever they want, and everyone else should just go along with it. And I mean, Thiel is more pretentious than a lot of the other Silicon Valley people, and he has a long history of citing these thinkers like Leo Strauss and René Girard and others who I think it's very fair to say he totally misunderstands and misstates their own views, and now he's in a very standard way trying to use the Bible to justify what he's thinking, and like. I think that he does it in such a cynical way that like even people like Ross do that can kind of see through that. And I think so. So that's maybe the significantly interesting things. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't think that there's anything intellectually interesting in do that. And I mean, in Thiel, and one looks sees this in figures that he sponsors, like Curtis Yarvin, where basically he's basically Curtis Yarvin's thing. If you strip it down, it's like let's return to monarchy, but the new monarchs will be the tech lords. Well, yeah, of course. Like if you have someone that tells you, you should be the king and you have billions of dollars, you're gonna give that person money. But like that's not something that's convincing to anyone that is other than a tech lord, or wants to be get money from a tech lord.
well, what I wanted to ask was if you could reduce Till's thinking down to its core, how would you explain it to someone? Because when you strip it of all the sort of references to Manson, the Antichrist, and all of this stuff, how
Yeah.
would you strip it down to explain it to someone that's just like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I guess the Bruce Springsteen lyrics comes to mind. Poor man wants to be rich, rich man wants to be king. King ain't satisfied till he rules everything. He wants to be a king that rules everything. I mean, this is what Jarvin says. We need new kings who are Silicon Valley tech lords. And he wants to, like Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king. He wants a society where there's no democratic limits on his prerogative, and he thinks that this will be the best society because it will have a lot of technological innovation. Although he himself admits that he and his Silicon Valley tech people have not had a lot of innovation, and that AI is a kind of Hail Mary pass to maybe do one last thing where they can have something significant, but that he himself is actually like quite honest that like, it might not even work.
Very last thing I wanted to ask you about all of this is, in very real terms, my biggest concern when it comes to Peter Thiel is with Palantir and the sort
Oh
of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just
Well, I mean, this is the flip side of the libertarianism, which is shows the fraudulence because it's always like Robert Heinlein, minimum state, but actually all these guys, and this is true of Elon Musk as well. Basically, I mean, this is why they want to be kings. They don't want to just be rich guys. They don't want to just be I'm a plutocrat, I'm Rockefeller, I'm wealthy. They want to actually be integrated with the state because they themselves realize in this period of stagnation where like you have lower profits across the board and certainly lower profits in their own industry, the only way they're going to be able to keep together is if they become integrated with the state. And that's why they're all sort of military industrial guys. They're all very, and this is, the kind of, I think, the real significance of Israel for them. The Israel is, it's a Palestinian laboratory. Israel is the place where they can do research and development for what they want the future of humanity to be. And the future of humanity is that they'll be the rich guys in their yachts, you're ruling over everything, everything goes their way, and the rest of humanity will be Gaza.
Well, that's what I was going to add was like when you look into what these guys are saying, really what they want is a very Orwellian sort of surveillance system. I was going to say in that regard, Curtis Yarvin talks about how he wants San Francisco to be Friscore, and
Mhm.
everyone will have an ID card with RFID response. I mean, this
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like
yeah. No, no.
something out
I
of
mean, but
1984.
I mean, it is the sort of techno feudalism, as some people call it. But it is, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's not a complex thing. They want to rule like kings. They want to be tech kings, and like the state is me. I am the state. Uh, and with like minimal or yeah.
You said minimal or
no democracy.
okay.
Yeah, minimal democracy, like maybe a facade of democracy, like with, Donald Trump as the figurehead, or maybe no democracy at all. Like, there's no evidence that any of these guys believes in democracy in any real way.
How important, and I'm not trying to keep you longer, I know we've already went a few minutes, but how important do you think it is to draw that connection between what Anthony Lowenstein, I believe, calls the Palestine Laboratory and projects like Peter Thiel's Palantir?
Oh, I think it's very crucial. I mean, I actually do think that this explains why, despite Israel's increasing in popularity, um, and despite the fact that, like what is going on gives lie to all their claims about human rights and advancement. I mean, I think that they are committed to Israel, and not just Israel. I mean, I think that, like, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf oil states, they all embody the ultimate end goal, which is, in the case of Israel, a Herrenvolk democracy, like a democracy for the ruling caste alone, or in Saudi Arabia and the other Emirates, just pure monarchy. I actually do think that their investment in the Middle East in military technology it comes from the fact that these are their utopian societies. This is what they want for humanity.
Well, we'll leave it at that, but I don't want to end it on a grim note. So, what do you think the hope is in all of
Oh,
this?
I mean, the hope is that I think if people find out about this, they're horrified by it, and if they're given an alternative, which as they are with Zoran, they will vote for that. I mean, like, I actually don't think that this is a program that has any popular appeal. And I think the main thing is that you have to run on it. And I know the main reason that they've been able to win is that the Democrats do not want to run on this, that they very cynically have this idea that we'll have our good billionaires who will support us. As against these bad billionaires. But I mean, I think that that sort of politics, the politics of good billionaires, is, I think, over.
Well, hey, Jeet, I want to thank you again for coming on. Parallax Views, always a pleasure to talk with you. How can my listeners keep up with your work and what's cooking with the Time of Monsters podcast?
Oh, well, probably on the time of monsters, I think I will actually talk about Peter Thiel a little bit more. But I think, yeah, they can go on the Nation website where both the podcast is and my columns, or they can go on Blue Sky. Just Google my name on Blue Sky or Twitter, and I'll be there.
This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Galen, Matt, Gunnar, Mark, Simon, Alexander, Catherine, G, Tilo, Emilia, Jeremy, Jeff, WV, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Darko, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mark M, Mersham, Galen, Gareth, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Will, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H, Y. Kellerman, Saded 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. As always, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.